Survivor Specialist Phil and Alexa are back, and we are doing our fourth episode of Classic Survivor tonight, talking about the twist from Survivor Africa, the fifth episode, so simply named because it is so simple. Still, to this day, one of my favorite episodes of all time. And it never gets worse on rewatch. In fact, Africa is one of those seasons that just always gets better. But this is where we are now. We've done 3 episodes already. If you haven't checked them out yet, make sure you do. We've had a really good time so far doing this. We did the Parvati episode in Heroes versus Villains. We did last week. We did the Kelly Wentworth Will Not Count. And what was the one in between? Why am I drawing a blank?
Coach, the Martyr
Coach,
your favorite one.
You know what it is? Coach is just so forgettable. But so those are the 3 we've done. Tonight we're doing the twist. If you're not a patron, become a patron. And Alexa, what about the twist?
It sure is a twist. This, what we're doing with this series is talking about the significance on Survivor as a whole and what this says for future seasons. This is the earliest episode that we have talked about and might be the earliest episode that we will talk about. Mm-hmm. This has so much carryover into present day that tribe swaps aren't even considered anymore. They are just a complete aspect of the game. They are something that people plan for. They've almost come to a point where they've come to a point where we are critiquing strategy because there are so many tribe swaps. When with this one, and I forget when in early Survivor they changed this rule, this one they had to be pretty strategic with trying to figure out who has received votes. You see that happening on Samburu, like trying to divide it up. That's why Silas gets all of his votes the episode before. I just think that I don't necessarily think it's fair or right, but I think it's just a really interesting way to try to break into opposing alliances, trying to, trying to succeed when you're in a minority. But this group had no idea what was going on. And I really like how they twisted it rather than, you picking new tribes or anything like that.
Oh, absolutely. It's so mind-blowing that this blew their minds. And it's so crazy because now we're so used to it. But this was an incredibly, incredibly controversial episode. When it first came out, it was very controversial because people were, why do they get to do this? Now, I talked about this on the Patreon today for the $20 patrons about how fair this is. And this was actually yesterday's episode, but do we still feel the same way if we don't hate Lindsay and Silas as much as we do coming into this episode? Because we hate them. I mean, yeah. Samburu, I really do believe that Survivor Africa, out of the first 10 seasons, probably the first 8, the pre-All-Star seasons, it's the most complete season from beginning to end. There are better seasons. I do think Amazon is better. I think Pearl Islands is better. But from start to finish, this is the most consistent season. It just doesn't have those massive moments in the second half, unfortunately. But because of the hatred that we have for Samburu, and how the young people, the Gen Xers who built our society and built this world, treat the older people once they get in power. And look, we might have had the same exact feeling if the older people got in power and they were treating the young people badly. It doesn't really matter who it is. It's just the fact that one side was treating the other side badly because they had power. And then this twist happens and it screws over the side that was in power that we couldn't stand anymore. Would this have had the same impact, and would it have such a lasting impact on the show had it been reversed and had it screwed over the old people, or had it screwed over Ethan and Big Tom and Lex? It's something to really think about, but sometimes Survivor just gets so damn lucky, and this is one of those instances.
This definitely is, because it's the leader of the jerks who goes home. Like, if it's Lindsay who goes home, or if it's Brandon, there's a sense of satisfaction, but not so much. And Brandon is someone who has like unbelievable confessionals this episode, and he doesn't even like this group. So it's really just like Lindsay, Silas, and like Kim, who I think gets off like not seeming like a total jerk. I think like Kim ends up being like fairly popular. Nobody likes Silas, and I only like Lindsay ironically. It's just kind of like a joke. So I think you're right. Like, I think if T-Bird goes home because of this, or if Frank goes home because of this, I know Frank wasn't a like huge crowd pleaser, but like if they go home, this completely sucks. But it's like the bad guy lost because of this. And I think, if people were analyzing the Survivor at that point the way we are now, I know that people would totally hate it. But you're right. Like, Ethan throws a challenge. That's another thing that
first thrown challenge in Survivor history.
by a professional athlete, which is insane.
By a professional athlete. And you can see it in this challenge. They are throwing it. They're not even trying to help Silas. And one thing I will say in defense of Silas, who now I know has had numerous charges against him. So it is what it is. I'm not defending him as a human being because
defending 2001 gameplay.
Defending 2001 Silas. I know I feel like it's so bad doing this in 2021 because I have to preface with everything. But defending 2001 Silas, he worked his ass off once he got to Baran because he knew he was in trouble. He knew that he really was not in good shape. And so he tries everything he can, just being a competitor, being somebody who wants to win the game. But this was so somebody that I always say got screwed and people don't and people give them a hard time is Andrew Savage. Andrew Savage gets screwed because of what happens with Lil. He can't help what happens with Lil. But people are always like, well, he should have been nicer to her. This had never happened before. People didn't come back from the dead.
He had no reason to be nice to her for what it's worth.
And the same thing happens in this season, where even though they still should have been nice to T-Bird and Frank, because ultimately you want to go into the merge and have the numbers. And up until this point, we had never seen the flop like we do in season 4. We had never seen the minority become the majority. So you're still supposed to be nice to them. So if you go into a merge 6-4, they actually stay with you and don't try to flip on you. Mm-hmm. So they still played it bad. But to be fair to Silas, he really didn't have to be nice to them because this was what pre-merge Survivor was up until this point. It was just, sure, we're going to vote you out of the game. Goodbye. Have a good time. That's what it was. And you could be mean. You see this. I mean, Jerry antagonizing Kel. You didn't have to worry about what Kel thought about her. It didn't matter. And so this is really one of those first instances of, man, poor Silas. He really, really didn't know that this was going to happen. Now, granted, I don't really feel poor Silas, but that is an argument you could make here because this was the first time it ever happened.
Yeah, it's like poor player who gets screwed. It's the same thing with Aaron. It's the same thing with plenty of others. And I think what's interesting, especially with you bringing up like the Andrew Savage Lil situation, we go all the way to season 38. We go to Edge of Extinction, and people still, and I don't fault players for this, still don't consider how they treat pre-merge players so much because why did you need to be nice to Reem? Like, why did you need to accommodate Wendy? And all of a sudden, Reem's voting for you to win. And that's something that like isn't natural. I think you still see, I mean, I think people just like treat people better in general now, but it's still just like not a natural feeling to be like, oh, I have to appease this pre-merge person because God forbid they might end up voting for me in the end.
Yeah, and you think about somebody like in Ghost Island. Bradley goes home right before the merge. Kellen doesn't even mention Bradley in her first confessional the next day. It's not like, oh, I lost my partner in crime. Like, he doesn't even mention it because the pre-merge is so separate from the merge. It's so separate. And this was the first instance of that starting to not become the case. This was the first instance of your decisions at every point in this game do actually impact if you're going to win or not. Because in season 1 and season 2, you could be as mean as you wanted to Stacey Stillman. Bye-bye. You could be as mean as you wanted to Kel. You could be as mean as you wanted to Kimmy Kappenberg. It did not matter. But in this season, suddenly, being mean to Frank and T-Bird and Linda and Carl could cost you $1 million. And it costs Silas here because if Silas wasn't so arrogant, if they hadn't rubbed it in the faces of Frank and T-Bird pretty much the entire time, then he probably doesn't go home because he's not split up the way he is. And Samburu might have tried to actually work with him. And Clarence was somebody that Ethan really did want to go home. So there was always going to be this possibility, but he just made it so obvious. And it does change the way people play the game. Think about the way that Marquesas is played in the pre-merge with Rotu. Rotu is very much like, no, we are a family. This is what we do. We do everything together, except for Kathy. You're the cousin that we don't like. But everybody else, that's how we play it. And then you look at Maraamu, where Boston Rob and Sarah and Sean are creating their chaos, but it doesn't matter that they're mean to Hunter. It doesn't matter that they're mean to Gina. Mm-hmm. But they are starting to cave a little bit, and they're talking about, well, what if there's a swap? I probably should be a little bit nicer and be a little bit smoother with this if they're not necessarily going home tonight. You can't be mean to the people around the people who are going home. You can be mean to the people who are going home. In Africa, you could be mean to whoever you wanted because it literally didn't matter.
And I think that speaks a lot to, I'm probably going to say T-Bird more so than Frank, but the like appeal of working with T-Bird, because Ethan related to Silas. Ethan actually really liked Silas, and he was like, I don't know, I don't want to get rid of this guy. Like, he's probably going to be good in challenges. I don't want to be working with Clarence. I could very much get rid of T-Bird and Frank, because the three who came over were not aligned whatsoever. And I also think, I mean this in a good way, this will come off in a bad way. I think this is one of Ethan's most strategic episodes.
I think it's his best episode of the whole season.
I think it really is, because the Pros Merge is very Lex heavy. Ethan throws a challenge. It works successfully. He knew exactly what he wanted, and he knew exactly what to do. And I think he probably saw it, because Silas is like, oh yeah, they're so terrible. I got this group over here. T-Bird came with more of the like, I want to work together approach, and T-Bird like obviously ends up lasting significantly longer. But I think Ethan, even as from a strategic standpoint, thought that he would just work better with T-Bird than he would with Silas, even though like outside of the game, Silas is someone he'd probably be friends with more so than T-Bird.
Yeah, and I think that does come down to the fact that even though Ethan doesn't get much credit as a winner of Survivor, he was playing the game from day one. He was just playing it in his own way. He wasn't playing it in a flashy way like Lex. He was just playing it in a pretty straightforward way, but he saw the numbers here. He knew that if he let Silas stay around, and Kim Johnson, that scene with Silas and Kim Johnson is just so old school Survivor, and I just eat it up, where Silas is saying to her, oh no, I'm tight with the three over there. And Kim's like, well, that's why you want to make the merge. And he's like, well, not necessarily. And it's like, It's so funny because he's telling her the reasons to vote him off.
Right.
And Ethan and Kim were smart. I mean, no matter what you want to say about this final two as a whole, they were smart, and they saw what was going to come of this. So they said, you know what? We need to get rid of him. And even if we don't like Frank or T-Bird as much, which I think they did, honestly, but Silas has to go, because now we have the numbers, and Frank and T-Bird are never going to work with the three young people over there. Now we're good. We're set. And so I do think this is Ethan's best episode. He gets up, keeps talking to Silas. I love the scene where Silas says, look me in the eye. And he does. And he's like, come get firewood with me. And I'm just dying. Like, and Ethan's eye roll. It's classic. It's amazing TV. But Ethan does a phenomenal job of handling this, while Silas is shown as kind of an amateurish player, because everybody was an amateur at this point.
Yeah.
But he was desperate amateur, and that is going to make you look worse than being the amateur in control.
Right. And I think like to go into the desperation too, I think there's also from Ethan and Kim's perspective, I guess not so much Clarence, like it's their option is either to work with a guy who's going to be probably great in challenges, but has like his wife and kids are over there, versus T-Bird and Frank, who have no one else, and they will be indebted to them. And that obviously ends up working out really well for them. So I think it going like a 2 versus 1. You do wonder if it's like Silas and Lindsay and T-Bird who go over, how that affects everything. But I really think at the end of the day, I think Kim is always going to relate more to that older group. And I think Ethan like has a bit of an old soul and isn't particularly cocky. That Samburu young group is incredibly cocky. I just think no matter what combination of people, they were always going to gravitate towards T-Bird and Frank.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the thing is, T-Bird and Frank, Frank isn't a reality TV personality, and really neither is T-Bird. They're both just normal people. And they both have like, we have your Southern, she's just so cute, shucks, even though she'd stab you in the back in a second, in T-Bird. And then you have your military, do it by the book guy in Frank. Those aren't really characters you see on TV anymore. But I think that's what makes them more relatable. I mean, Kim Johnson's also not a reality TV personality. So it makes sense that she would gravitate towards Frank and towards T-Bird. And really, if you go and you look at the young people, other than Lindsay, these aren't reality TV personalities. Brandon is, Alexa and I were talking about this today. Like, Brandon is so subdued compared to like once they start being like, pretty much I think it's after John Carroll when they start casting like, their token gay guy. And then it always ends up being like the loud villain. Oh, they're sneaky. What are they going to do? I always think of Colton first. But Brandon's just like a normal guy. And his confessional in this episode where he says, I'm so glad I'm gay because I couldn't handle these women all the time. Yeah. It's hilarious.
It's hilarious.
It's so out of character for what we're used to seeing from what Survivor starts to stereotype with as the show goes on. So there's not really, I was saying today on today's Patreon, this was actually today's, why Kimmy Kappenberg and why not some of Survivor Africa's characters for second chances. I know T-Bird was on the list, but where was Brandon? Where was Kelly Goldsmith? Where was Clarence? Where was Lindsay? I mean, these are really fun characters, but also we like them because they're real, not because they are massive, massive, massive characters like we see on TV nowadays, where half the time they don't even feel real, even when they are. Like Elaine, she feels like she's not real, even though she's probably the realest person who's played Survivor in the last 10 years.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was trying to remember. I'm trying to remember where I was going to go here. I don't know, but I guess like Lex, so let's go over to the two different swap tribes at the swap tribe that didn't go to tribal council. Lex calls his tribe Sambuhu, which is hilarious. And I like, again, it's still so early where they're just like, why are you here? Like, what do you like? And Lex is like, I don't want to be here either. It's like Lex and Big Tom. And then who's the other one who goes?
Kelly.
Yeah, Kelly, obviously. Yeah. And it's good because Kelly and Lex never really liked each other from the beginning. I feel like Kelly probably would have been a part of that young Samburu group, but probably less of like a bully. But
I think she could have been a bully.
She could have been. Yeah, she's snarky. She's snarky, and I mean that in a good way. But like the more I watch a season, the more I'm just like this is like probably the best one of the first three, even though people typically say that it's the worst of the first three. But we have an absolutely incredible moment where Big Tom removes a tick from someone's butt with steaming hot water, which sounds really unenjoyable. I don't know if you've ever dealt with that, but that sounds awful.
Well, no. And again, like as we talk about the impact this has had on the show, how many times did they try to find their next Big Tom? And it was for moments like this. And it's the fact that everybody finds him hilarious. Everybody finds him harmless. Kim Johnson has the confessional way later in the season about he's harmless. I mean, he knows what he's doing. He goes out there, he's bathing all the girls. He's pulling a tick. His confessional about if it comes to a woman's butt, that's what I was put on this earth for. It's so ridiculous, but they searched for that Big Tom character season after season after season. And they could never really find it again. They really tried, but they really never did because he is just so one of a kind. And,
they also, I mean, you got to set the bar of like, if you can understand this person in confessionals, it's not Big Tom. I literally, like, even during that tick scene, when I know what happens, I'm like, I have no freaking idea what this guy is saying. No. And I love it.
Yeah. And there's another one where he was saying I could have turned around and hightailed it back. And it's like, what is he saying when he's talking about when the actual swap happened? And he's going to run away. You can't understand a word he says. But it makes it so entertaining. I mean, but this really is. I mean, you think about Big Tom and Lex. They're as opposite as it possibly gets. And then they work together so well. And I do think that while Australia really started to set the tone for what Survivor would become, I think Africa set the tone for what Survivor wanted to be as it moved forward. Because more seasons look like Africa than look like Australia as you start moving forward with the swaps and with who they try to put on the same tribes to start, the relationship building, how they kind of try to focus on that, at least in the earlier seasons. It really is from those opposite walks of life. You don't really get that in Australia. You do with Roger and with Elizabeth, but that's really the only one you're getting. You don't like in Africa. It's the whole story of the season is it's a 57-year-old teacher, farmer from the middle of nowhere. I think Lex says the Democrat from Santa Cruz, and then you have
covered in tats. Yeah,
covered in tats, and then you have this professional soccer player who's quiet. It's like they're as different as can be, and it really works. And I think that it's moments like what we see in this episode when they have to start interacting with people that they don't necessarily like, that Survivor has tried to replicate year after year, but now people are just so out of touch with the reality of the reality that half the time it comes across as like fake and culty, which isn't real.
Yeah. And Worth Playing For just left a good comment and said Lex and Big Tom are probably cast in the same tribe specifically for drama, and then they become allies. That's completely
Rudy
it.
And Rich.
That group before that you just mentioned, that's like I forget if it's Sean Rector or Vesepia who does the same thing where they talk about their final four and how it's like just a really, really random group of four people. Like Lex and Big Tom were not supposed to get along. And obviously they end up having their issues later on, but they are like to this day still best friends. And I just think Africa cast like they did like I guess this is even just early Survivor too, but they just cast like real people who were super different. And I think you look at somebody like Kim Powers or even Ethan, even though he's a professional athlete, like Kim Powers, Ethan, Kim Johnson, Kelly Goldsmith. Those are like objectively normal people.
Mhm.
And then you look at the other like half of the season and it's like, okay, they were cast to be reality TV stars.
Yeah. But they still don't feel like it in today's day and age.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, you got to think about it. Like, Big Tom and Lex were definitely meant to be against each other. Brandon and Frank were always going to be against each other. Like, they were, or it was going to be the next Rudy and Rich, which is another thing that Survivor
That's actually
wanted.
probably what they were going for.
It was one or the other, and you know what? Either way, it's going to make for good TV. They're going to have a story they can tell, which is really all they care about. So, like, Africa was good with that, and this episode, especially as you start to see these people having to come out of their comfort zone, seeing Frank finally be comfortable and be happy where he's at, seeing T-Bird be happy where she's at, seeing Silas and Lindsay be desperate, hearing Brandon's real thoughts. Kim Powers, by the way, is supposed to be Julie Rosenberg. So there you go.
I always forget about that.
That's who Julie Rosenberg, and it's literally a 5-foot New York City person. That's it. That's what it is. Yeah. So it's like, you actually get to start to see this. It just makes for such entertaining TV. And, when Lex and Big Tom and Kelly are going to get the wood and the water and everything, and they're giving the instructions from inside their mosquito nets, it's hilarious. Yeah. I mean, it's so perfect. So, to me, this episode is always one of my favorites because it just has a little bit of everything, but there's nothing complex in it. Again, like, obviously they didn't have idols, so they're not talking about idols, but the whole conversation is just like, I can't believe what just happened. This blows my mind. But it really blew people's minds. Yeah. Nowadays, it doesn't feel like they dwell on what the craziness was because they're already trying to set you up for the next twist. Well, if there's 8 million twists, you get numb to twists. When it's one and you can really spend 45 minutes dwelling on the impact of that one twist, that's when you're working on all cylinders, not when you have to spend 45 minutes talking about which twist is going to come next. It's just not the same.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, let's talk a little bit about how they actually perform the swap, because now it's all just drop your buffs, randomized. I think like we've both said that Guatemala's is one of our favorites, where you're kind of creating a reward challenge out of it or a bit of an auction out of it. We've seen, I guess, like Gabon, it's like weakest to strongest. How do you feel about like the first introduction being like you nominate people and they're just going to go walk somewhere and then you receive 3 new people?
It's amazing. I think it's fantastic. And it worked for them because they were split 6-6. Send your 3. They keep it really dark. You don't know what's going to happen. You just think it's going to be a reward challenge, and then boom, keep walking. You go that way. You guys go that way. It's perfect. And I think it really, really works. And I always like this more than just pull out of a hat. I mean, Marquesas is then the first example of we see a tribe swap where they just go, they stand on the disc, they flip them over, and that's what tribe you end up on. But I always like any sort of picking, anything to get the juices flowing. You pick this person, you pick that person. All right, now who are you going to pick next? That's when Survivor is at its most enjoyable, at its most fun. When it's just random, it doesn't work. And really, in this episode, even though it's sort of random because they didn't know what they were doing, they still chose the people who were going. And that's what creates the drama of Silas going, I'm over here with the 2 people I hate the most. What did I do? Like, I made this happen. That's what makes that the most interesting anyway. And then Worth Playing For says anything to get the juices flowing except China. Yeah, the China one is stupid. But also, they did it. They tried it. It just didn't work. And I'm okay with trying something. But now it just feels like it's the same recycled, okay, drop your buffs and then pull this. And there's no excitement. It's too random. I don't want it to be super random. I want it to be Palau, pick from that tribe, pick from this tribe, pick from that tribe, pick from this tribe, go.
Yeah, it has to be like half random, like half knowledge, half non. We, especially with Modern Survivor, like you and I have both been pretty vocal about, like, you have to give the contestants like a general heads up of what's going on. But what's cool with this one is, because if you do completely random, you're right, that doesn't work. But if they tell them up front, like, hey, you guys are going to be picking new tribes, everyone's just going to like repick their own alliance, which also isn't fun. This was a really good combo of, obviously the group didn't know what was going on, but they still elected leaders, etc. And so they, Samburu elected their leader as well as the 2 people who they don't like. And then at Baran, Lex is probably the right leader there too. So there's still like some strategy to it, but there's enough of a mystery that they don't exactly know what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. And you can't do it obviously now because now everybody knows, oh, it's a tribe swap. It's tribe swap time. Here it comes. But there is a way to do it in a more interesting way than what we're seeing. And I feel like that's the one thing that I will say about Survivor is that it has gotten less creative.
Yeah.
And this shows where they were thinking back in 2001. This was mind-blowing, but it was simple and it was great. A little twist. It's creative, fun. After that, not after that, but nowadays it's just the same. Great. On day 13, they're going to drop their buffs. They're going to switch to 3 tribes. One tribe is going to make something new. Great. Same thing every time. You know exactly what you're going to get every single tribe swap now. And there's going to be 2 people who are screwed or 1 person who's screwed because they had no say over what happened, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, you get the oh, Alec, you look like you're in the minority. How do you feel about that? And it's like, oh, don't find a crack. We've heard it every time.
Every time. And it's not interesting anymore because that's not fun to hear. Can you find a crack in this alliance? Who cares? We've seen it happen. They
will and they won't. It's both.
We've seen Chris Doherty where it totally works. And then we've seen people go home the next day because it doesn't work. It's not as enjoyable. And I just think Survivor has gotten less creative. And I'm not asking for massive, monstrous creative things. Island of the Idols is overdoing it. You're trying to be too creative. You're trying to force stuff. This was just, boom, simple. Jeff stands there in a field, says, come on, go, boom, bye. A little idol for Gary Hogaboom. It's so simple. It's so simple. Yes, I know that now you can't be super simple because you're having to create, but think simply. Don't think, oh, what if we had Rob and Sandra on an island and every time people came, they either got to flip something. No, it's too much and it's stupid. It's not fun to watch.
Trust your cast.
Exactly.
I really think after saying this a few minutes ago, like present day, I do think that the most effective / best for the fans would be the Guatemala version because we were all thirsty for the auction. This would still surprise them. It's now at the point where it's like, oh, we voted out 2 people, buckle up for the swap. They wouldn't really know what to do. It would put a little more importance on a reward challenge. I really think that would be a great and effective and entertaining way of swapping tribes without making it obvious and make it other than just vote number 3 and vote number 6 or whatever.
Or do Gabon. Gabon's fun.
Gabon's is awesome.
Gabon's is awesome. Rank your tribe. Now everybody knows where they stand. And I don't know why that one fell out of style, considering the person who was ranked, what was it, 3rd most useful or 2nd most useful on their tribe was the last one picked, and it goes on to win the season.
Yeah. And for that one too, that's a really good point because when you rank your tribe, that makes people feel things. I will be pissed if I am put on 6, 7, 8. And so then when I'm on my new tribe, there is real normal interpersonal drama created as opposed to Phil, if you pull a blue buff and I pull a red buff, I'm like, okay, I was aligned with Phil. I am now not aligned. Gotta start anew. This would create more, that would create a lot more interpersonal conflict. I don't know why they didn't do that more. And they really picked the right season for it.
Yeah. And not for nothing on this season too, what's the easiest thing to follow is the storyline after the swap. It's so easy to follow what's going on with Silas, what's going on with Lindsay, why Brandon and Kim feel the way they do, why Lex, Tom, and Kelly are annoyed, and that they're a little worried that Kelly might be, thinking about going with the younger people, which would make sense, why Ethan and Kim are still concerned about Clarence, but Silas, T-Bird and Frank now have a new lease on life. Silas is trying to work his way. You follow every single one of them. Like you said about New School, if you pull a red buff and I pull a blue buff and we were aligned and now we're not anymore, they don't even mention it half the time. Because it's okay, great. I'm done. I'm moving on. What do I have to do now? And I think that impacts it because then you start to forget if we didn't do a podcast and even doing the podcast, how hard is it to remember who started on half the tribes half the time? I couldn't tell you who was on Cell A and who was on the other tribe and Winners at War. I have no idea because it switches so often. And then it starts to be well, who was aligned on day one anyway? You don't really know because you can't really follow it. This one works so perfectly because it's so easy to follow what the stakes are for all 12 people who are left in the game. So don't give me nonsense that it's just hard to edit it all. No, it isn't. We know, I think we get a confessional from every single player in this episode, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure we do.
It feels like we do.
From all 12 of them, maybe not Kim Powers, but I'm pretty sure we do. But You get a confessional from all 12 people, or at least know where all 12 people stand. Normally when you're swapping, there's 14, 15 people. Okay, so you got to figure out how to get 2 more personalities in there. This is a full Survivor episode, The Twist. A full episode full of everything you could possibly want in Survivor. And we don't do it anymore. Like, for some reason, they don't do it like that anymore. And I really don't understand why.
Yeah, and this one's nice and clean because it is only 12 people. And that's, the benefit of having a smaller cast and a later merge. But I think it just makes it easy because it's like, it's 3 and 3. There's 1 bad guy and 2 good guys. It's simpler math. It's and it's simpler strategy too. And I think simple strategy is a good thing. You were just saying, like, I don't even remember who was on what starting tribe and who was aligned, because it doesn't matter. And this might be like kind of a strong statement, but I really feel like alliances don't even matter anymore because every single vote, it just changes. And you have, like, people have their number ones, but it's not like it's a 6 versus 6 alliance anymore. And I feel like that's only going to, like, that line is only going to continue to get blurred, like in season 41 and beyond. But I don't necessarily think that's a good thing because I think it's hard to follow. I think it makes for less, like, personal connection and more of just like, I don't really care if I like this person or not. I'm going to vote with them and then I'm going to change my mind after that vote. I think it doesn't necessarily make things sloppier, but it just makes things a lot harder to follow.
Yeah, and I think too, what an issue is that it's not so much that people don't have their alliances, is that they're not portrayed properly a lot of the time. I mean, you talk to people from Island of the Idols, their closest allies aren't the people that we're told were their closest allies half the time. I mean, Tommy always says he was close with Dan and close with Dean throughout the game. We don't really see that for most of the game. We see him with Lauren, and that's it. Now, he says he was close with Lauren, but there's a difference there. And so as we're trying to kind of see who people are close with, we don't have a constant. And it's the constant and the variable, the 2 things in math that you need, or in Lost that you need.
That's what I got. I don't.
Yeah, as Daniel Faraday would say, you have your constant, you have your variable. Well, in this episode, your constant is the 3 people from each tribe who stay. Your variable is the 3 people from each tribe who leave. It's easy to keep track of that constant and that variable. The problem with drop your buffs and do whatever is now you have variables for everybody. There is no constant. There is no Brian Corridan, because he has the most tribe spirit, having to pick the tribe or which tribe he wants to start on and where's he going to go. There is none of that. But we need a constant. And I think that when there are constants, when you look at Gabon, like the ones we've mentioned, Gabon, Guatemala, any type of pick, like in Palau, even though that happens before the tribe swap, not at a tribe swap, but when the tribes are just being formed, when there's a constant, it's more interesting to watch than when there isn't and they just drop the buffs and then you get a confessional of somebody saying, wow, that sucked, fade to commercial as they walk along the beach. Like, that has happened so often that you've become numb to it. How do you get it back? The things that Survivor is always trying to tweak, I guess this will wrap it up, and then Alexa, I will let you speak. The things that Survivor is always trying to tweak is idols, advantages, whatever. But the simplest thing to do would be to go back to some of their earlier twists that they haven't used in years and throw people off with that. Imagine if they walked out on the island and it wasn't blank versus blank versus blank. They just walk out on the island and Jeff says, great, there's 20 of you. Who's the oldest ones here? You and you? Great. Come on up. Pick your tribes. That's the type of stuff they need to just go back to. And those are twists still, but they're fun and simple, and we don't see them anymore.
And I bet, I mean, yeah, like you do the Thailand premiere with that, and then try the China tribe swap. It probably wouldn't be as disastrous as it would, or as it did. I really think that people would say, oh, well, I got, like, Ryan and Chrissy, like, I got a really good vibe from this guy. Like, let me bring him over to my tribe. I think that's a really good point, that other than Edge of Extinction and Redemption Island, like, twists that fail, Survivor is now so different than what it was. Those twists might actually really succeed in present day Survivor. And I would really like that. And I think I candidly don't even know why they feel the need to have themes anymore. And it's probably because they're in Fiji and they're not changing locations, but Survivor is a show that is probably only gaining new followers with quarantine and with the show being put on Netflix. Why do David versus Goliath 2? Like, why do Heroes, Healers, Hustlers 2? Yeah. When all you can do, everyone knows the feeling of a schoolyard pick. Everyone knows the amazing feeling of getting picked first and the really shitty feeling of getting picked last. That's relatable.
I don't know that feeling.
Yeah, I've never been picked first.
No, I've been picked first. I've never been picked last. I don't know that feeling.
Yeah,
no, but that's a great point. I mean, that's a great point. And just call it Survivor 41.
Yeah.
Who cares? Call it Survivor post-COVID. No one cares what it's called anymore. And by calling it a theme, you force things that don't need to be forced. It's more interesting because also when you have a schoolyard pick, you know what happens? You get connected to the people right away because there's a name and a point and where they were picked put to them. Yeah. Ian chose Katie. You know what I mean? Like that is something that happened. Karen chose Willard. That told so much about Karen and so much about Willard. Jake picked his tribe. That made such a difference for how you feel about that tribe in Thailand because you like Jake and why it's harder for him to vote these people off. So it creates drama right away. It creates personalities right away. And so to just kind of make it whatever it is, it gets stale. And I wish that Survivor, when they're trying to come up with these new themes, when they're trying to come up with, okay, what's a good twist that we could do? Stop looking forward and sometimes look back because the twist is one of the greatest episodes you have all ever put out on TV. And you have ignored everything from that episode apart from the fact that people tribe swap now, but you've ignored what made it so perfect in the beginning anyway. I think that's what the bummer is.
That was a really good conclusive statement.
Thank you.
One of the best things you put out. We get a skeleton from it now. And Akina here just made a good comment. Suddenly there won't be any idols or advantages. That would be a twist. First of all, that's never going to happen, unfortunately. But that's what we need. We need to go backwards.
Yeah, and I'm not even saying that we need to go completely bare bones like Survivor Season 1, Survivor Season 2.
Yeah.
But just to, even if you have idols and stuff, but give us the idols in a situation where we can have drama like the I-2-4 or the Foa 4 or like whatever's going on, and I know that that's an underdog with, coming back against somebody. But then again, the I-2-4 is totally manufactured by production because they let Penner and Candace walk off the mat.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me that they don't look back at their older seasons. You know what I mean? And you talk to some of the people who, are fans of the show or involved with the show or whatever it would be. And that you just meet in passing at the finale or something like that. You're at the bar after the finale and you just meet somebody. And it's interesting how they might not know who Johnny Fairplay is, even though they just played Survivor Season 39 or Season 38. I'm not calling anybody out. I'm just saying in general, Johnny Fairplay is probably a bad example because he has a podcast, but there are people that these people haven't heard of that we think are household names or that have done what we would consider household things. And they don't know about it. And so while I don't think you have to go back to basics, I do think that there's so much to be learned from the past about what it is that people just love anyway. And use it and make your swaps more exciting and make the starts of your seasons more exciting and do things like in Survivor Amazon when Jenna and Dave get to go and pick, totems or whatever it is. Do those little things because that's when Survivor's at its most fun, and that's when Survivor's at its most exciting.
Yeah, and I think like the kind of twists that have like human ripple effects, those are the good ones. And like finding an idol, playing an idol, that has a different kind of ripple effect. Like what you said in Amazon, and this is going to be a bad example because it didn't have a major ripple effect, but like try more of the Millennials versus Gen X Summit. Like try more of those because what you're doing is you're just putting people together and seeing what happens. That would have a human ripple effect. I think those kind of twists and those kind of changes, those are the right ones to make.
Yeah. And not bringing in Sandra and Rob, not doing a Ghost Island. Don't do Ghost Island where people are going and getting advantages from the past. Just start doing things from the past because there's so much gold to be taken from these early seasons of Survivor. And people still talk about Silas and Lindsay to this day. People still talk about Lex, Big Tom, and Ethan to this day because this worked. This worked so well. T-Bird has talking with T-Bird now because this worked. Not anybody from one of the first 7 seasons of Survivor could hop on and have their own podcast, whether it's under Rob's umbrella or not, the way T-Bird could, unless there was some popularity there. And there is popularity there. And the reason that these early seasons were popular is because they did interesting things that people hadn't seen before. And I think that now we've gotten to the point where we've seen it all. And so when you say, how does this affect the show now? What is the lasting impact? The twist, this episode has had the largest lasting impact of any single episode of Survivor ever on the show. But it's gotten to the point where it's almost unrecognizable that this is where it came from. And that's okay sometimes, but it's also okay to maybe pay homage to this episode.
I think I have a couple things here. I think it'd be cool if we did one of our monthly retrospectives about the best twists in Survivor or twists that we would like to see back. Because I think that would force us to look at some old twists like what we're doing now. Like this, I wouldn't even consider this a twist, but I loved in Cook Islands, and this was the case in a few seasons. If you won the reward challenge, or if you won the immunity challenge, you got to eat on the jury bench and take a look at the other tribe. That would be huge in present day Survivor because of how many inter-tribe dynamics there are. I think that's something that would really succeed. And I think maybe like if you do a Ghost Island 2, don't bring back any advantages. Bring back like twists that didn't work. Give that a shot. I think there's still a way to be creative that doesn't involve putting some form of immunity in some person's hands.
Agreed. And try the Palau start again. But this time, don't kick Jonathan and Wendy out. Wanda. Don't kick Wanda. I know, I'm thinking of Nicaragua. Don't kick Wanda and Jonathan out right away. Just make it so that this is how you start. Day one, people don't know. And maybe keep it as one world, but 2 tribes. Maybe do that, because one world would have worked if the cast was better and if they would have actually stuck with the one world theme. They didn't stick with it.
That's nothing. Press your themes too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that unfortunately there's just certain times where it's given up on too soon, and it's because there's almost a panic there. Your diehard Survivor fans have made it through Survivor Thailand, Gandia Gate, whatever you want to call it, Grind Gate, whatever you want to call it. They've made it through Survivor Fiji and Survivor Cook Islands, where you literally divvy teams up by race. They've made it through the Jeff Varner and Zeke incident. They've made it through Brandon Hance.
Yeah.
They're going to stick with you pretty much no matter what. They made it through the Dan Spilo nonsense, and we're still pumped to watch season 40.
Yeah.
All of that going on, they're going to stick with you. So trust it. That you can maybe take a step back and take a chance and say, no, trust me, this will work in the long run. Because a lot of the seasons that might not have been insanely popular at the time, like Tocantins, are insanely popular now. That's a top 10 season for almost any diehard Survivor fan.
Yeah.
Because of what went on, and it's got a lasting impact, where a season at the time, like Panama, that was actually really well received, doesn't really stick like that. I know that hurts you, Alexa, but it doesn't stick as well. Palau doesn't stick as well, but you never know. Sometimes you just got to stick with it, and it works.
And I wonder, I mean, this would require us to get to Survivor season 80. This would require a whole other generation of Survivor. But I have when I consider rewatching a Survivor season, I wouldn't even consider rewatching a season from the 30s. No. Maybe Ghost Island, maybe Vs. Goliath. Ko-Rong. Yeah, but I just because I kind of like the time capsule, and I like watching. What I'm loving about watching International Survivors, I like watching Survivor that's different from what I've been getting for the past however long I've been doing this podcast, 5 years. I don't get that with late 20s through the 30s of Survivor. There's just nothing appealing about it, because at the end of the day, it is all kind of the same conversation. Versus when you go back on Africa, or you go to Pearl Islands, which we're going to talk about next week, they are time capsules of society and Survivor.
And I think that now Survivor tries a little bit too much to be a time capsule of society and not enough of a time capsule of Survivor. Like when you have, Brett LaBelle came on our podcast and called it lesson of the week. And I really don't disagree with him. Sometimes it feels there's good moments that come out of it. Jamal and Jack, that's a good moment in my opinion. And then there's bad ones that come out of it, which, are the endless other ones we don't talk about anymore from Island of the Idols because there were a million of them and it felt unrelenting. And so I think that Survivor just needs to go back to, remember, Frank comes out here at one of the episodes, I think it's later on, and he's ripping on everybody because they just want free stuff and they're lazy and they're stupid and they don't respect people. And he's insulting everybody to their face, or at least he's insulting the younger people who I think at the time, I honestly, things have changed so much in our country, it doesn't even matter. But Frank was stating his beliefs, knowing it was going to piss off other people. And then yet he still gets a pretty emotional send off. Because Survivor's not poking their finger in to tell you how you should feel about it. You're just going to feel how you feel about Frank based on how he's talking. And I feel like now they try to almost manipulate how you feel. And I think that's why it becomes stale, is because, while there's for every great moment, there are those moments where it's like, okay, like you could have just done it. Like I don't need to be told, like Karishma cut her hand and people were mean to her. That sucks. But we also didn't need it for like 10 more minutes after that to be like, okay, now I feel bad for Karishma. You were going to feel bad for her anyway.
Or it's even like, sometimes it's as simple as just like, maybe you don't need to put the emotional music behind everything. I remember when Kellen got voted off, like we liked Kellen because we were lucky enough to like have some side conversations there. But like a lot of people didn't like Kellen live. And then it was like, well, why did she get such an emotional send off? Like, now we're supposed to like her. And then I think most recent, like in the Winners at War final, whatever, when Sarah's talking to Jeff about like bias against women in Survivor, it's like music. And I feel like that automatically will cause eye rolls when, in my opinion, the conversation like was really good, but it was automatically like lesson moment. But it should, like, that was a real live conversation that like hopefully did something. But when you do something as simple as like changing the tone, we're going to add the music, that completely changes it.
It completely changes it. Yeah. And I don't know what Survivor can do to kind of fix that. And like, we always said that this classic Survivor was going to be about its impact on the show now and how it was. Does it hold up? I think the twist totally holds up because Silas gets emotional music in this episode. Who we don't give a shit about? Silas. Nobody does. And yet he still gets the emotional music because he is left on his own. Nowadays, they would never give a villain emotional music because they're a villain and they're bad and we don't like them.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what I mean? Like, oh, why can't we just be, if you're down, you get emotional music. If you're up, you don't get the emotional music. Who cares? If like now there's too much focus on if you are a villain, if you are a hero, if you are lazy, if you're not lazy, if you're a strategist, if you're a dope. It's just, there's too much focus on it. And while there was always going to be the focus, I mean, Jerry and Colby, hero, villain, whatever, it still felt like Jerry and Colby were being their real selves. And Lynn and Silas still felt like they were being them real selves here. Where, when Jamal's lazy because he's laying down after the Molly situation, that doesn't feel real.
Yeah, it doesn't feel real at all. Especially when Jamal then comes on and he's like, come on, guys. Like, that's the one thing, and he's sleeping. So, anyways, Phil.
Yeah, so big conversation with this episode, like big because it is the twist, and now Survivor every episode could be called the multiple twists. But I think this one holds up. I think it had a positive impact on the show for sure. I think a tribe swap was much needed. I think that is something that we all wanted, but I do think that Survivor needs to remember that it's okay to go back and not just trying to keep thinking of what's the next big thing, what's the next best thing. Remember, I had a gigantic, this is my favorite one, Alexa, and then you go. But in college, I had a giant phone. Like I had the smartphone, but a huge screen. And everybody would always make fun of me that it was really big. So then, all these phones were smaller. The iPhone, the iPhone 4, whatever, is really small. And I had like the Samsung Galaxy Jupiter. It was gigantic. Everybody would make fun of me for it. And it was stupid and whatever. And I was like, great, but I can like see stuff. Well, now what's happening? Every phone is getting bigger. It's going back to what it was because they're realizing actually people kind of like that more, even though at the time it might not have been incredibly popular, or it might have been controversial, or it might have been something that less people had. I was a trendsetter, but now now people watch so much on their phones or do so much on their phones that it makes sense to have a bigger screen. Well, sometimes now it just makes sense to go back to things that might not have necessarily worked the first time, try to make them work, because now what people might not have thought they had a need for back then, they have a need for now. And that's my pitch to Survivor. I hope Jeff got on the Jeff phone and listened in on this, but that's my pitch.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm a huge fashionista, as all of you know. Like, trends of all types ebb and flow. Like, everyone has looked at like old pictures of their parents or themselves and like, oh my God, what the heck was I wearing? We are going to think that. Trends come back, music comes back, fashion comes back. There is a way to make Survivor similar to original Survivor without compromising interesting strategy or interesting storylines. I always say this, trust your cast.
Yeah, it's 100% right. It's 100% right. And that's really what you get from watching the old seasons. If you watch them in order, which I've been doing, you go through these early ones, you're like, it's a different feel. And it's a feel I kind of like. I don't know if it's just because it's what I grew up with, but I like the feeling of it.
It's good. If you don't have anything else, do you want to finish up what's going on this week, and I can lead into next week?
Yeah. So tonight, John Millsip and I, a patron, we're talking Last Crusade, Indiana Jones and Last Crusade, and Back to the Future at 8:30. So that'll be a lot of fun.
2 movies that I have seen. Finally.
Yes. If you're looking for a way to get into this podcast, tonight's the night to do it. Just tune in. It's going to be in a half hour. It's going to be a lot of fun. John's great. I'm obviously great. So make sure to tune into that. That'll be a lot of fun. Daily content for the $20 patrons has been rolling on. Weekly content for $10 patrons. Alexa and I are going to be doing the Q&A shortly. One of these days coming up, but we've been doing a whole lot. Tomorrow night, John, Annabelle, and myself will be recapping next episode of The Challenge. And on Friday, Julian Baker's new album comes out. So make sure to tune in for that. Not that I will be talking about it, but I will not be accessible on Friday because I will be listening to it on repeat.
Phil will be doing a dramatic, tearful reading of all of the lyrics for $50 patrons on Friday. So really make sure to tune in for that one.
I will say, I've heard a couple of the songs, a couple of her singles, air quotes, a little bit more upbeat. So if you're trying to access Julian Baker, if you're trying to access mine and John's top 100 movies, this is kind of the week for you. This is the week. So that's my
big week. I may listen on Friday. I'll let you know. I don't want to go crazy. And to lead into next week, we have a pretty exciting week. Starting next week, we're going to do a better job of like allocating the week out. Robert and I, we've been doing our South African Survivor on Tuesday for the past 2 weeks. It is supposed to be more consistently on Monday. So Robert and I will be back next Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern time to recap the 3rd episode of South African Survivor. And to continue on with our classic Survivor episodes, I think we will have our best episode yet. We will be joined by a guest. So we have a little every other week thing going on. We are going to recap I usually look up the name of the episode, the Pearl Islands Merge. And
not the merge.
Oh, the Outcast episode.
Yeah.
Messed that up by one. We are going to be joined by none other than Andrew Savage. And this is timing up well, considering that we just talked about his boot episode last week. And now we are going to talk about the reason that Survivor has changed with Andrew Savage. So tune into that. That's going to be next Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. We're really, really excited to have him on the podcast. He is a new guest for us. So this is going to be a ton of fun.
Yeah, I think that one's going to be really good. I'm trying to find the name of it because it is. I don't want people watching the actual final 10. I know we keep talking to each other about it as if it's it's a
merge, but it's not.
But it's not. So what is the name of this episode? Somebody's going to get to it before me, but I'm loading it up. Here it comes. Ready? Anybody? Oh, it's What the Part 1. Duh. So awesome. We're watching What the Part 1. Maybe we do watch just What the Part 2 too. I mean, it's 45 minutes each. So maybe we watch both parts because Savage is going to talk about both of them. That's for sure. So maybe we just do both. If you don't watch both, you don't watch both. But maybe we'll just call this What the Part 1 and Part 2 so people can know that that's kind of what we're talking about. Because they do go together purposefully. But that's what we'll be doing next week. Did you say the time and everything? I was looking up everything. So.
Yes, time is all good. You guys know where to find us on social media. Become a patron. Now is the best time to be a patron. You are getting more content than you would if there was a Survivor season on. So hop on. Everyone, thanks so much. This has been my favorite series that we've done throughout the off season and probably ever. So hope you guys are enjoying it too. And we'll see y'all. Phil, we'll see you in
30 minutes. Bye, everyone.